So today we're going to take our first small step into color. So we're going to be making a painting using the colors we've used so far, our white and our Payne's gray. And we're going to be adding one color, which is transparent red oxide, or whatever name your particular brand of paint calls it, transparent earth. I realize I've been saying transparent red oxide, but the Gamblin paint that I think I asked you to buy calls it transparent earth red. This particular color goes by different names depending on the brand. So transparent earth red, transparent red oxide, red oxide sometimes. But anyway, it's all basically the same color. So, so we're going to be making a painting where we are looking at temperature. We're looking at temperature. We're not looking at a full range of color. So we're taking a very small step into color. So I think someone earlier in the class mentioned this color wheel, or mentioned the creator of this color wheel, Johannes Itten, I-T-T-E-N. So this is a color wheel. And this may be an obvious question, but if we are talking about warm and cool colors, which colors on this color wheel are warm and which colors are cool?
The right side is cool, the left side is warm.
Yeah, I think that's right. It probably, even if people haven't been introduced to the concept of warm and cool color, that's probably immediately apparent to people. That when we say cool colors, we're talking about blues, right? Blues, violets, greens. And so warm color, just based on what Claude said, would be those colors on the left side of the color wheel. So reds, orange, yellow. And you know, to be honest with you, I don't know the science of color with any great depth, or the physics of light, which is what results in us seeing color. I know color primarily from working with it as an artist, but I don't think that there's any scientific basis for us saying that red, orange, yellow is warm, green, blue, violet is cool. I think that's just a metaphor, because we think of fire, the sun, things like that as warm. And we think of warm colors as, usually we think of them as indicating a warning. And I think we attribute warnings to a kind of like heated urgency. And then cool colors we associate with water, ice, the shade, things like that. So we associate them with cool. But anyway, so blue, violet, green, red, blue, violet, green, cool, red, yellow, orange, red, yellow, orange, warm. But it gets a little bit complicated, right? So like, what is this color here, this yellow, green, is this warm or cool?
Warm. Warm.
Warm, okay, so, you know, I think in isolation, I would also call this a warm color. And then what about this red violet?
Warm also?
I think, again, I would call it a warm color in isolation. But what if we're comparing it to this? If we have to say one is warm and one is cool, what is red violet compared to red?
Cool.
Cool.
Red violet, I think most people would see as cool compared to red. Right. Go ahead. Were you going to say something, Michelle?
No, it's just clearing my throat, sorry.
Okay. So color temperature, it's important to note that color temperature is relative. In other words, it's not absolute in the sense that red violet, we may in isolation say that that's warm, but it's really only warm relative to other colors. So it's warm relative to violet, but it's cool relative to red. The same thing about this yellow green. It's warm relative to true green, but it's probably cool relative to yellow, although that's maybe a little bit ambiguous. There's a, so which is, I'll ask people this, which is a warmer color? Is true blue warmer or is blue-green warmer?
Blue-green.
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 Okay. Is blue-violet warmer or is blue-green warmer?
Blue-violet?
Okay, so Michelle says blue-violet.
Blue-green.
Blue-green. Who is that? Ashley?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right answer to that question. I've always seen blue-green as warmer than blue-violet. But I know many, it's a kind of lighthearted debate among painters, which of these blues is warmer. I always think of this as a warm blue and these as relatively cool blues. But because this has some red in it, some people perceive this as warmer than this. I don't think there's an absolute answer to that. Like, I don't think temperature is ultimately scientifically verifiable. I think it really has to do with perception. Most of us, virtually all of us, would agree that these colors here are warm. Virtually all of us would agree that these colors here are cool. You know, when it comes to determining the nuances, we may differ on that. We may have different perceptions.
Professor, doesn't it also affect how the color is presented, like what's near it? Or that'll
Right.
sort of...
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, and that's a little bit what we're getting at with this. So if we see red violet presented next to red, this is going to appear cooler. Or if we were to place, and Itten's book does this, shows examples of this. If we were to place a small, I think maybe what you're getting at is let's take two pieces of paper. One of them is yellow and one of them is blue. And then we take this color here, a little chip of this color, and place it into the middle of this yellow. And then we take a little chip of this color and place it into the middle of this blue. We are going to see this color as an entirely different color when it's seen against this yellow as opposed to when it's seen against this blue. It will just look to us to be a different color. It'll be a little bit hard for us to believe that they're actually just the same color seen in a different context. And that affects our perception of warmth, but it affects our perception of the color altogether. Is that what you meant, Emilio?
Yeah, I was just going back to that whole Albert's, that color
Yeah.
theory thing with what color is next to is sort of, you know, it'll, I can't think of the word, it kind of changes the temperature and the perception of the color.
Yeah, that definitely, that's true. Okay, so warm and cool is a very important part of I'm sorry, always a very important part of thinking about painting in a variety of ways. So we're going to talk about warm and cool in a somewhat specific way today. So if we look at that in terms of paintings, warm and cool is something, as I said, painters are always thinking about, or virtually always thinking about. I think I mentioned this before. When I was first in an undergraduate, one of my teachers told me that all paintings are either warm or cool. In other words, paintings are always primarily warm or primarily cool. You know, so of course as an undergraduate, I thought that must be true because my professor told me. It quickly became apparent that's not really true. I mean, it's often true, but that's not really true. You can't say always, but it's often true. So these are two paintings by a contemporary painter named Licia Scavage. And she often works where she conceives of a painting as being primarily warm or cool, as we can see in these two paintings. This painting is almost entirely warm. This is a warm painting with some cool accents. Excuse me, a cool painting with some warm accents. These are two paintings by Aaron Douglas, an early 20th century American painter. Again, I think we would all identify this painting as warm, and this, excuse me, this painting on the right as warm, this painting on the left as cool. This is a contemporary painter. I've shown her before, Dominique Fung. So if we look at Licia Scavage to Aaron Douglas's paintings get a little bit less obviously warm or cool, right? Not too much. So Aaron Douglas is working with a bit more of a complexity of warm, of cool and warm here, right? There's the obvious warmth of the yellow. And then these violets, we could maybe read these as warm violets, certainly as opposed to these temperatures here. Here, again, while I think it would be the case that most of us would read this as a warm painting, we do have some greens that start to move towards cool. And then maybe these browns would be there. Well, let me ask people, how do people read these browns? Let's say these darker browns. Are people reading those as warm or cool?
They feel
I
cool.
would say cool.
That blue.
Yeah, like the darker browns would be cool.
The darker brown would be cool compared to the lighter brown.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I heard different thoughts from people. That's again a perception. You know, I think that goes in the realm of perception. I think I would see this brown as a cool brown, this brown, and this brown as a warm brown. And then Dominique Fung, it's again a more ambiguous, but I still think we could come to a conclusion about the relative temperature of each painting, right? Like, is this a warm or a cool painting? On the left.
Warm.
Warm. With some-
Warm, I think most people say, with clear, cool accents. And then I think a cool painting with clear, warm accents. So one way artists think about warm or cool, it's a way of unifying and constructing a composition, right? So we also want to think about the temperature of the light. So here we're pretty much talking about the temperature of local colors. In other words, we're thinking about this yellow, that's a warm color. The blue wall is a cool color. And when I say local color, I mean the color that the generic color name we give to objects in the world. So a lemon is yellow, a plum is purple. And that's a kind of conventional way of identifying the color. And so the local temperature of a lemon would be yellow. The local temperature of a plum would be cool. I'm sorry, the local temperature of a lemon would be warm. The local temperature of a plum would be cool. That's the local temperature, similar to the local color. So the local color here is yellow, local color here is blue. And we've primarily been talking about, local color so far. Local temperature of the colors. Here, these are, this, on the left is a painting by Gwen John, who was an early 20th century British artist. And on the right is a painting by Anna Achen, who was an early 20th century Swedish artist. And these are two paintings where the issue of warm and cool becomes a little bit more complicated. So on the left, if we identify the painting in a way similar to how we've identified the previous paintings, I think most of us would say that this is a warm painting. And the painting on the right, I think most of us would say this is a cool painting. But if we really look carefully at the temperature of the light in each painting, I think we'll see the reverse. I think if we really carefully look at the temperature of the light and don't get distracted by the local temperature of the painting overall, which is a cool painting. If we just look at the temperature of the light, notice that what's coming in is direct light from the sun. And notice that where we can see that sunlight hitting the head of the girl, hitting the rug, and even to some extent hitting the white windowsill. We'll see that that's a warm light source. If we look at the light filtering into this room, on the other hand, what's the temperature of this white?
It feels cooler, like the yellow is also cooler because of the light coming in.
Exactly. It's a really good observation. So this is a cool light source. So if you think about window light that you experience in your house, say, when the sun is in the sky in such a way that that sunlight directly comes through a window, you'll find that that light is warm. And so most people, when they are looking for an apartment, they want they want a southern exposure so that they get that direct warm sunlight. If you think about light that's coming in a window that's not direct sunlight, so during the day when the sun, let's say, is on the other side of your house, so you're getting window light, but it's not direct sunlight. It's reflected light. That's a cool temperature. And that's primarily because that light is reflecting off the sky. I know it doesn't sound like it's possible for that to happen, but it is. The light reflects off of all of the infinite number of particles in the sky and picks up some of that cool color and reflects back into the house, into your home. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the cool light coming in the room. So what we're seeing is a painting overall that we read as warm, in a sense, because the local colors in this painting are primarily warm, right? Yellow wallpaper and a kind of red-brown rug, or I guess red-brown tiled floor. But we're seeing this yellow as cooler than we would see it if it were being hit by direct sunlight. And then most of this room is in shadow, right? Because the sun is hitting directly in just a few places. And what's happening in this painting is, because the temperature of the light source is warm, the temperature of the shadows is cool. So we're seeing this as an overall cool painting. Does that make sense to people?
Yes.
I just noticed this. I've never noticed this before. This kind of beautiful little placement of a violet accent here. I'd love to see that painting in person. I've never seen it in person. Okay, so I am going to, if you'll excuse me, if you don't mind, I have to take a 1-minute break. I have to, along the lines of the discussion we just had about warm and cool light temperature, revisiting this painting we've looked at now a few times. And you'll notice that all of the shadows in this painting are warm. And the light source, it's a little bit ambiguous, and I suspect it's a little bit ambiguous because of the reproduction. We might read the light source as warm in this painting, but it's actually a relatively cool light source. Like if we look at the temperature of the shadows, which are warm, and then look at, really ask ourselves how is the particular color of that skin being affected by the light source? It's giving it overall a kind of grayish, slightly dulled down color. And so that we're seeing a cool light source. Related to something we've talked about in class, reflected light, or light and shadow, reflected light. Let me just ask if anyone wants to offer a possibility of why is the reflected light on this part of the arm and this part of the chin, why is the reflected light in those areas warmer than like here on the arm, this reflected light is warmer than the reflected light here? Why is that?
My answer.
I'm sorry?
I want to answer.
Go ahead, Alika, yeah.
The upper arm, it's closer to the body. And because it's closer to the body, it's illuminating a little bit more to the upper arm. And the reflective light on the lower arm is farther from the body. So it's a little bit darker because it's farther. So there's not much to reflect from.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this part of the arm is pretty much right next to the rib cage, right, which is a kind of broad reflecting surface. And so we're getting a brighter reflected light. And then also what happens, you'll often see the reflected light on lighter skin tones. You'll see it be warmer because the light what actually happens, the light passes through layers of the epidermis and then reflects back, and picks up some of the redness of the lower layers. So you're seeing a very warm reflection here, a very warm reflection here, less reflection here, because this part of the arm is further away from the body. Okay, so two paintings, on the right, Alice Neal, on the left, Claude Monet. So in the painting on the right, we have a cool light source. And notice how there are warm shadows, just like in the previous painting. The painting on the left, we have the relatively warm light of the sun, and then these cool kind of gray violet shadows on the snow. Same thing here, Gabrielle Munter. Cool lights illuminating the skin. So we have these kind of cool yellows, cool pinks, the warm shadows. And then we have the opposite on the landscape lit by the sun. While this color overall, there's a kind of interpretive element to it, we still see the relatively warm green of the trees illuminated by the sun, and then the relatively cool shadows. I guess this gets a little bit complex. There's a kind of cooler green. Although if we look at this green compared to this green, again, we see warm compared to cool. I'm gonna skip over that. Or maybe I should just in contrast. So this is Pierre Bonnard, overall warm painting. I don't know, what do people think? Overall warm or cool?
I would say warm.
Warm, yeah, I think warm because, what did someone else say?
I would say warm.
Warm, yeah, I think warm primarily because of the intensity of the warm areas, I think in a way, you know, like if we distribute the percentage of the canvas that's cool and the percentage of the canvas that's warm, I think it might be almost 50-50, but still because of the intensity of the warms, I think it reads as a warm painting. Here, the artist is working from life like we are, or like Gwen John was in that painting we saw a few minutes ago. The painting of the yellow wallpaper, but the cool light. So this is an artist working from life. But using perceived warm and cool temperatures of light in a kind of interpretive way, a somewhat interpretive way. So we're seeing the outside light represented as cool, overall cool. And we see the parts of the room where the light is filtering in as cool. So we're seeing a kind of cool violet on the tablecloth. So this is actually a complex painting because as soon as I say that, certain parts of the painting contradict what I just said. Because the light here on the door we're seeing as warm, at least insofar as I'm reading this as a white door. Maybe it's not supposed to be perceived that way. So I guess Bonnard is actually playing with warm and cool in a kind of complex way. I'm sorry to be sort of thinking about out loud about this painting, but this painting doesn't completely conform to a absolutely consistent logic, which is not a bad thing at all. Omar, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. So this painting, right? You see darker red, and then you see green, then you see white, you see a little bit of yellow to reflect the sunlight. Because they have dark red in the paint, wouldn't it be considered blue and yellow as more of a cooling color instead of being a warm color? Because there's already a a dominant warm color in there.
So you're saying, so where there's darker red, like this passage here, or this
Yeah,
here, would we consider these to be cool?
no, warm, because red is considered warm.
Well, again, if we take this red here, let's just say this rectangle of red, if we
That's
take
like more violent, right?
that in isolation, I think most of us would say that's warm. But I think, if we compare this red to this red, I think that's relatively cool. That's cooler than this, or certainly than this. So
Yeah,
it's an issue of relative warm and cool. It's relative. So this is both warm and cool, depending on what it's seen next to.
gotcha.
Does that make sense, Omar?
Yeah, yeah. I guess different. Even though the color is warm, but if you compare it to the other red next to it, within the paint, it becomes a cooler color.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a painting by Kerry James Marshall, primarily cool painting, right? Overall. And yeah. Okay, so one final note about warm and cool, and this is getting a little bit more to what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to be using warm and cool colors, a very limited palette. We're going to be using our Payne's Gray, our white, and our transparent red oxide. And we're going to be making an observational painting. So we're using a limited palette primarily to look for warm and cool. But the limited palette we're going to be using is actually a palette that you sometimes see artists use. And you sometimes see them use it to great effect, where they are able to very successfully suggest a completeness of color even though they're using an extremely limited palette. So this is a painting by Rembrandt that's at the Met. I think it's a terrific painting. And again, a painting that's here in New York. I would encourage everybody who becomes interested in painting because of this class or is a painter themselves, again, to go to the Met frequently or as much as you can. This painting is probably done almost entirely with the colors we're going to be using today, or something like them. So do I have a detail of this? No. So if we look at the colors in the head, the colors of the skin are probably made with white, an earth red, and black. So the shadows are black and earth red and a little bit of white when necessary. We see those kind of bluish accents in the skin. That's made probably with a little bit of black mixed into the color. The variations in the skin, a little bit more red here, a little bit more white here, or a little bit redder here, a little bit lighter here. That's just different degrees of white. Now there may be a tiny bit of earth yellow in the gold, but much of this painting is probably done just with a white, an earth red, and black. So this painting obviously has more color than that. But I want to point out an interesting fact about this painting. So, okay, go back to this a second. Obviously, a good deal of the color is using much more than just white, black, and red. So there has to be some yellow and blue in here, almost certainly. You can make a green with yellow and black because black functions as a blue in many contexts, but you can't quite make this intense green with that. You know, there's obviously blue here. But I read a chemical analysis of the paint layers in the heads in this painting. This is a painting, by the way, by Hans Holbein. It's called The French Ambassadors. Anyone know what this painting is famous for?
The structure,
No.
like the structure is like the skeleton in the middle.
Yeah, so I think that was Judy who said that this painting is famous for the skull, right?
Yes, and also like the foreshortening of the instruments down there.
The foreshortening of the instruments, okay, yeah. Anybody, so not you, Judy, can anyone see a skull in this painting?
Yeah,
Yes.
Why does it look like that?
it's at the bottom, all distorted looking.
No, if you put on a filter, I think.
That's-
Oh, yeah, the bottom.
This here is a skull, this object here. For those who said that, did you know this painting and know about the skull, or did you just recognize it?
I just recognized it.
Recognize, okay. So this painting is made so that when you look at this painting, when you get up close to the painting and look at it from this corner, that distorted skull corrects itself because of the distorted angle to the painting, and you can see it as a skull. And so this painting is kind of famous for that. That's a perspective trick called anamorphosis. And I think it's a fascinating element in the painting because this painting this painting was commissioned to commemorate a meeting between two ambassadors. This is the French ambassador. This is the French ambassador to King Henry VIII's court. And then this is, wait a minute, do I have that right? Or is this the ambassador to, it doesn't matter. It commemorates a diplomatic meeting between the English court and the French Catholic Church. And all of the elements in the middle of the painting represent the different spheres of human learning, at least as they were perceived at that time in this place. So the arts represented by the musical instruments, these technological devices, these various devices for measuring atmosphere and on in physics and in science and in geography. But inserted into the painting is a reminder that all of this makes no difference in the end, right? That all of us are going to die. And so that's a very common trope in paintings, particularly from this time. But the way he's inserted it into the painting so that you really do not see it clearly, that it can only be experienced over the course of really deeply looking at the painting, which I think is a fascinating aspect of this painting. And another, I think, fascinating aspect of that element, something I experienced when I saw this painting in person. This painting's in London. So I went to London for the first time, maybe 10 years ago. And I was absolutely blown away by this painting. I looked at this painting for hours. And whenever I go back to London, I don't go back frequently, but I've been back once, maybe twice since then. I always go to this museum and spend most of my time looking at art, looking at this painting. I love this painting. What's remarkable about what the artist did, I think, is that we think of paintings as being moments frozen in time, right? So, I mean, in a way that defines what a painting is. Let's say, unlike more contemporary forms of art, like film, which happens in time, or a live performance, or music, which happens in time, a painting is a moment frozen in time, right? That's in a way what gives it its particular symbolic power, or it defines a work of, defines a painting. But this painting manages to sort of overcome that limitation in the way you have to, in order to see this painting, you first look at this painting, like, let's say, from a distance, as we do when we're looking at paintings. And then because of the enormous level of detail in this painting, you go up close to it and look at it, you scrutinize it up close. And then to see this, for that to pop into view so that you see it as a skull, you have to be constantly moving over here and positioning yourself so that you're looking at this painting from down here in the lower corner. So not only do you have to move from your central viewing position, but you have to move and crouch down a little bit. So that in the process of looking at this painting, you're very aware of the process of moving through space and time. And so it's as if the experience of the painting, which ought to be an experience of looking at a moment frozen in time, somehow this painting manages to somehow give you the sense that you are overcoming that limitation. And I think that's, whether the artist intended that or not, it's just a brilliant aspect of this painting. Anyway, so to get back to how this is meaningful to us today, technically, I read a chemical analysis of the paint layers. So the art historians were trying to figure out exactly which pigments were used. And for the painting of the head, the artist used nothing but white, black, and earth red. So in order to get these different colors of skin, the artist just used white and different amounts of red. And then to get these shadows, the artist would either add black or black with a little bit red to warm up the shadows. So these shadows here are a little bit cooler than these shadows. The redness of the lips is obviously just adding a little bit of the earth red to the white. And then what the artist is doing is varying opacity, so relatively thicker layers of paint, and transparency, so relatively thinner layers of paint. So if people remember, I talked about glazing on Tuesday. When you glaze a color thinly over another color, it creates a more vibrant appearance to the color. Whereas if you put color down thicker, you're going to get a less vibrant appearance to the color. And so to get different degrees of vibrance, the artist is using different thicknesses and thinness of the paint. So where the mixture of red and white appears a little bit duller in these areas here as opposed to here, the artist is probably adding a little bit red, but probably also putting this paint down more thinly, or maybe glazing a little bit of red over an underpainting. So you can actually, and I only point that out because you can actually get, if you know how to use the paint, you can get quite a richness of effects and the appearance of a richness of color range with a very limited palette. And an advantage to that is that the more limited your palette is, the better you're able to control a sense of the overall unity of the painting. So that's an advantage. It's certainly not a rule. I don't want to suggest that that's a rule that an artist should use. But it's something that some artists like about a limited palette. It allows them to more easily establish a unity in the painting. And on that note, that's something that all of the artists we've been looking at are doing with color temperature, right? Color temperature is the way the artist uses color temperature. So Kerry James Marshall in this painting, it's called Sunday Morning, 7 a.m. It's creating a unity, a compositional unity by virtue of the overall cool temperature. It's a cool painting with warmer accents. And that's true of really all of the paintings we've been talking about. And so just look now, stepping a little bit out of our assignment today, looking forward to the borrowing a composition painting. I hope I'm not throwing too much into this. When you do your final abstraction as part of that assignment, I'm going to ask you to determine a color idea of your own. So I'm going to ask you to use colors where you're thinking about your own color idea. So it might be useful in preparing yourself for that to just ask yourself, what are the color ideas I'm seeing in the paintings we're looking at? So color idea can be as simple as a yellow painting, that's the color idea here. A blue painting, that's the color idea here. Maybe we could say a blue painting with some warm accents. A violet painting's the color idea here, or a cool painting. A warm painting, we could also say it's a painting that's made up primarily of earth tones here. The color ideas here get more complex, right? But again, warm, cool, using, what did I just reverse that? Warm, cool. Think about that. Just start thinking about what are the color ideas an artist is using. How would we describe the color idea in this painting? Anyone want to?
Maybe like muted, warm tones.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Often the color idea in a painting like this is referred to as neutral, but muted, right? So, and muted with warm. So I like how you put that. There is, sometimes you'll hear painters identify paintings as neutral plus one intense color. So this would be neutral plus an intense color, right? The red, or neutral plus two intense colors. and actually you'll often see that throughout the history of painting, that a painting will be primarily neutral, like grays and browns, and then there'll be 1, 2, sometimes 3 intense colors. So that's another way of thinking about a color idea. This is really a neutral painting, right? Primarily neutral. This is also a kind of neutral painting, kind of, painting made up of warm and cool grays. So anyway, think about that as you're looking at paintings. So I don't have, as part of these images, a discussion about the next step in the assignment, the borrowing composition assignment. But before we move on to the demo today, let me do something briefly. I'm going to pull up a different, okay, so let's go to the section where we talked about the borrowing or composition assignment. Okay, so the next step in this assignment is to take your painting that you've chosen as the painting you've chosen as the source of the assignment. So let's say you've chosen Artemisia's Judith beheading Holofernes. And what you're going to do is you're going to do a study of that painting in which you analyze the simple underlying compositional structure of lights and darks. So you're going to look at your painting and you are going to simplify all of the complex information into 3 to 5 values. So if you're able to simplify your painting into just 3 values, white, black, or another dark color like brown, like umber, and then a middle value. So you're going to simplify the painting into those 3 colors, those 3 values. And then do a copy of it where everything has been radically reduced to just flat areas of 3 to 5 values. So this painting has been simplified so that the artist interpreted the limbs as primarily shapes of white, right? Because of these 3 values, the limbs would be closest to white. The background and most of the shadows in these figures would be the black value. And then certain parts of the painting were interpreted as the middle tone. So this passage here has been interpreted just as an area of middle tone. This passage here has been interpreted just as an area of middle tone. So you're going to do a simplification of the painting where you reduce the painting to just large areas of simple value shapes. So does that make sense to people? Do people see how the artist went from this original to this interpretation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And just notice that you really are radically simplifying detail. So you don't need to look at detail. You don't need to render things or show the gradations of light and shadow. So Artemisia went to great lengths to show the velvet of this drapery over here, right? But that if we look at that as a simple area, that all of that information goes into a kind of middle tone, right? So this is just painted as a big middle tone area. The artist didn't see like the little nuances of the highlight and halftone on the limb here, because if we look at this as just a simplified compositional shape, it's just an overall light value. So you want to interpret the painting as, in terms of radically simplified shapes of light, dark, and middle value. If you want to add, if you think that your painting needs a greater range of value than just 3, you can add 2 more values. So one between white and the middle tone, and one between middle tone and black or dark brown. And let's, someone emailed me and asked about the final step in this. Why don't we hold off on that? Why don't I explain that once we get to this step? Okay. So one important aspect of this painting or this study is it's the exact same proportion as the original. And so that is going to be a requirement for this painting. You have to do your copy so that it is the same proportion as the original painting. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
How would you figure that out? What's a way you could figure that out?
Using grids, maybe.
Yeah, how would you use a grid to do that?
I would sketch it with a pencil first, pencil and ruler probably, and then maybe use like an app on my computer to put a grid over the picture.
Okay, so you could do that. But I guess more, so you're talking about getting the proportions right. I mean the overall, like the proportion of this copy is the same proportion as this original rectangle. You're gonna have a 9x12 piece of canvas paper. That's what you're gonna do this study on. But a 9x12 piece of canvas paper is not necessarily the same proportion as this. So how would you figure out like what proportion, like say you're starting with a 9x12 canvas paper, how would you figure out the correct proportion?
Maybe you could like take a ruler to the, like what I would do, I put it up on my computer, take a ruler to it and see exactly what the measurements are. And then I would transfer those measurements onto my canvas and maybe make a frame or find a canvas that actually fits it. Like I don't have to use a 9x12. I could use a, I don't know, 12x16 or whatever.
Right, but even okay, so let's say we know this painting is, I'm just gonna throw out a number. Let's say we know this painting is 24 inches wide by 32 inches high. And we have a 9x12 inch piece of canvas. How can we get a proportion that's equivalent to 24 by 32 out of a 9x12?
You could create a grid where, regardless of the dimensions, maybe you want to make a grid that's like 6x8 or 8x6, like finding it feels like a lot of math, but like finding a grid that would work on each canvas.
Yeah, that's true. So you would like on your 9x12 inch pad, you would find like a smaller square. Is that what you mean? Or a smaller?
Yeah, like as long as you have the same number of squares or the same sort of like dimensions for the units that you're using, that would work. So as long as you have like, I'm not that good at math.
I would suggest, I would suggest a tic-tac-toe grid, which is very easy to form. And you place certain part of the painting within those grids and transfer it over onto your canvas paper.
I mean, these are all possible answers, but it all depends on exactly what you all mean.
I feel like it's something with proportions, but I'm not exactly sure like how to get there. Like for example, if it's 9 inches wide and your canvas is 18 inches wide, then it's 2 times bigger. So it's like you would make the whatever you're doing 2 times bigger or 2 times smaller.
Yeah, so let me see if I can, I could do um, let's see. Okay. Okay, so here is one way you can do it. Now this would require having a printout of your original. So let's say this is your, but this would require having a printout. So you take, and I highly recommend people print this out, that you don't do it from your phone, because you can't see something on a phone. That you take a printout, you print the image out as large as possible. And then you cut off all borders. And so let's say this is your 9 by 12 inch canvas. The largest rectangle here is 9 by 12 inch canvas. You put your reproduction in the corner of the canvas, and then you run a diagonal through the 2 corners of the reproduction up to the edge of your canvas. And that's going to show you where you can drop a line down. And then this part of your 9 by 12 is going to be exactly the same proportion as this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So you can do that if you have a printout. If you're working purely from the screen, then what you're going to have to do is, let me see, let's look up. I'm going to look up a painting.
So, Professor,
Yeah.
if you have, if you pick the picture with trees and lights, we're only sculpting out the persons in the picture, or we're doing everything?
You're doing everything that's visible, everything.
Okay.
I'm only going to Rubens because this is not that this is a very good painting, but I'm going to the museum website because I think it'll tell us the size of this painting. Okay, so let's say you're working from your screen and this is your painting. And you have to turn, you want to do this painting so you have a 9 by 12 sheet of, you have a 9 by 12 sheet of canvas, 9 by 12, yeah, 9 by 12 canvas pad. So you find out the dimensions of this painting. So this painting is 96 by 148 inches. So that painting's 96 by 148 inches. And you have to turn that into a 9 by 12 inch canvas paper. Okay, so how would we take out of a 9 by 12 inch canvas a working surface that is the same proportion as 96 by 148?
Oh no.
I mean, you could put the original size of the painting, or I'm sorry, or the size of the canvas in Photoshop, and then size it down. I'm not sure because I'm not sure who here is like good with Photoshop, if I can even describe that right.
Well, I wouldn't know how to do that. I know what you mean, but certainly you could do that if you know any of those digital platforms that will help you do that. But mathematically, how would we know how to get a working surface from a 9 by 12 inch sheet of paper that's proportionally the same as 96 by 48?
Find the common denominator.
Yeah, you could do something like that, right? So what is 9 by 12? So 9 by 12 is, or 96 by 148. So what's the proportional relationship of 148 to 96? So there are mathematical ways you could do it. So the way I would do it is, I'm also not good at math. I would go to this. I would go to my percentage calculator. So I have a percentage calculator saved. So I'd go to percentage calculator. And so what I would do is I would go to this part of it. 96 is what percent of 148? And then I calculate. So it's 64% of 148. Okay. And I know I need to get out of a 9 by 12 inch piece of canvas paper, I need to get a working surface that is the same proportion as 96 by 148. Is everybody clear with me right here so far?
Yes.
Okay. So how do I figure out a surface on 9 by 12 that is the same proportion as this? So I know that 96 is 64% of 48. So I am going to do what is 64% of the longest dimension on my working surface. What is 64% of 12? 7.68. So I am going to take my 9 by 12 sheet of canvas, and I'm going to use the length as the biggest dimension on my working surface. And then I'm going to measure up 7.68, like a little bit more than 7.5 inches. So my working surface is going to be 7.5 inches by 12. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can go to percentagecalculator.net and use this. I find this to be just in general a very handy tool. So you can figure it out in terms of percentage. If anybody is having trouble figuring out how big your canvas should be, you can email me the dimensions of your painting, and I'll email you back with the dimensions you should use on your canvas paper. Okay? So don't hesitate to do that. Again, you can email me if you're having trouble figuring it out, because I know this gets confusing. It's not, I am terrible with math, so I completely empathize with people who have trouble with math. So is the first step in this assignment clear to everybody? You're going to do it on the 9 by 12 inch piece of canvas paper. You're going to figure out a working surface on your canvas paper that is the same proportion as the original painting. And then you're going to do the simplified copy, the simplified compositional copy of the painting. Okay.
You said we could pick any colors we wanted to, right?
I'm sorry?
You said we could pick any colors we desired, right?
No, not for this painting. For this painting, for the simplified version of this painting,
Yeah.
you're going to use just white and black and middle value.
You got it. Thank you.
For this phase, the next phase of the painting, you can invent your own color idea.
Thank you.
Professor,
Yes.
Why not just get a 9x12 printed copy of the painting you chose? Could you do that?
Well, because you're not going to be able to print out a 9x12 of this, because this is not the same proportion as 9x12. You could print this out. I mean, if you have the means to do it, you could print this out as, like, say 9 inches wide and whatever the height would be, and then cut it out and then just trace that proportion on your canvas. You could do that. But this is not, but the proportion of this is not the same proportion as 9x12. That's the issue. Does that make sense?
In theory, but not completely.
I know this gets a little bit confusing. So if anyone needs help figuring that out, just email me.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You could look at like measure the dimension from the picture from the computer.
Yes.
And then translate it over. Okay, because I thought for a second I thought you have to get like the actual dimension of the painting that we chose.
No, you could measure it. You mean just take a real ruler and measure?
Right.
Yeah, you could do that and do sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I always hesitate to do that for some reason, but yeah, you could do that. Okay, let's take our break, and then we'll start the demonstration. Okay. So how are we doing here on time? Hi, everybody. So we will start our demo. So like I said, today we're going to be doing a warm, like a painting where we're studying warm and cool. So what I've done is I've set up a still life where I have an arrangement of warm and cool elements. And so we're going to be talking about we're going to be concentrating on just perceiving varieties of warm and cool. So we're not using color in such a way that we're trying to match the colors we're seeing, or even approximate the colors we're seeing. That's not quite true. We are trying to approximate. But we're primarily looking at relationships of warm versus cool. So for your assignment, or for the painting you do, set up a simple still life. If you want to just have one object, that's okay. I've chosen 2 objects just to make clear the relationship of warm and cool. So I've set up 2 objects, an apricot and a kombucha squash, I think it's called. And I've set it up on a surface and a background that it also plays with warm and cool. So I think based on our discussion, it's probably obvious to everybody which of these 2 objects here is warm and which is cool. But what about the background and the surface of the table? Which of these colors is warmer and which is cooler?
Well, the pumpkin is cooler, right?
The pumpkin is
warm.
Apricot, but I mean the background as opposed to the tabletop.
The tabletop?
The background is cool, table is warm.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that the background is cooler than the tabletop, right? The tabletop is a kind, is a slightly warm, it's a warm gray. We could maybe even see it as a kind of brown, where the background is a blue. Now, just again, related to the relativity of warm and cool, this is cooler than the blue background, this is warmer than the blue background, but the tabletop is cooler than the flesh on the apricot, right? So when we're talking about warm versus cool, again, we're always talking about relationships. So, or relative determinations.
I have a question.
I'm sorry?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm a little bit confused. Maybe I missed something. So the next project we're doing, is this choosing two organic stuff or just a warm and cool object?
It really, it can be just a warm and a cool object. I mean, yeah, it could be.
Okay, and the other question is, you were showing us early on the picture, the borrowed composition.
Yes.
So that's not the project that is due now. I mean, due next.
It is actually.
Oh,
So you
so it's
should work on
two
both
projects.
of these things.
And?
You should work on both of them.
Okay, so the borrowed composition and this one here.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Okay, so one thing I wanted to show people is if this has come up for anybody, you know, you use your oil paint for the day and then there's some left over. And if anyone is wondering what to do with that, you can do what I've done here. So I had white and black left over after our painting session on Tuesday. You can, you know, painters have tried many different ways of preserving their oil paint. What I do is I cut a small piece of saran wrap and I wrap it around a little thing of oil. And so that's been there since Tuesday, and it has stayed perfectly fresh. I should probably not say perfectly fresh because it doesn't last forever that way, but it will last quite a while. It'll last a good week. So if anyone wants to do that, you can certainly do that if you're concerned about saving oil. You could also.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so the borrowed composition and the warm and cool assignments, they're all due Sunday along with the assignment we did the day before yesterday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if anyone needs more time, you can let me know.
Thank you.
So we're going to be using white and black, white and Payne's gray, excuse me. And then we're going to be adding to our palette our transparent red oxide.
Are these the same color we're using for the bar composition?
I'm sorry?
Are these the same color we're using for the bar composition assignment?
No, I would just use white and black, white and Payne's gray.
Oh, and then have like a 3 to 5 values.
3 to 5 values, that's right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so by the way, I'm using an old canvas so you can see the ghost of a previous painting there. So I'm just going to ask you to ignore that. I ran out of new canvases. Okay, so I'm once again going to go over some drawing issues because drawing is an important part of this process. So I'm going to be starting my drawing in the same way I always do. So I'm going to draw with a little bit of transparent red oxide. And I'm actually going to draw with transparent red oxide mixed with a little bit of white, just so I don't have such a dark color to use. And I'm going to start my drawing the same way I always do, which is to simplify these organic forms into a series of straight lines. I'm sorry, did someone ask a question? So I'm going to, I'm actually just starting with the line dividing the tabletop from the background. And then I'm going to draw my objects on top of that. I have to be careful of making sure, so I'm going to need to make these objects. I'm actually going to ignore that. Changing my mind. I first want to figure out where I'm going to place these objects. So again, starting with series, simplifying these objects into a series of angle breaks. So just straight lines. You know, again, as a way of clearly setting up the important angle breaks on the contour. So my fisheye lens is distorting the apricot a little bit. You're seeing it on the camera as about the same width as its height, but it's actually longer than it is high. And so now as I draw my squash next to my apricot, I want to make sure we have enough space here. Right? I do. So correcting that line, I think my first line was not quite accurate. And I'm here looking very carefully at how exactly the apricot overlaps with the contours of the squash. So looking very carefully at this relationship. So I don't want this relationship, in other words, exactly how much the apricot overlaps the squash. I don't want it to be sort of right. I want to really see that accurate. So I'm looking again exactly how that overlaps. Just correcting a little bit the contours of my apricot. So let me just, again, because I think this way of drawing might seem counterintuitive to people and not observant enough at the particular characteristics of the objects we're looking at. So let me just, again, go over why I think that this is a good approach to drawing organic objects. So if we look at the round contour of this object, in order to draw that contour convincingly, you know, even ultimately when we have arrived at that as a round form, for that contour to be convincing, we need to make sure that the angle relationships between high points on the contour, so like, let's say that point there, compared to this point here, compared to this point here, like a series of points in relationship to each other. Again, this point here compared to the point where it overlaps the apricot, not to mention this point here, the angle relationship to that point there. Those angle relationships from one point to another, if we want our objects to read convincingly, we need these angles to be accurate. And if you're just trying to take a kind of straight ahead like effort at that curve, it's very easy to draw the object so that those angle relationships are not convincing, and you then never get a convincing representation of the contour. So I think it's a very good technique to start a contour by just setting up the relationship of key points on the contour, set up the relationship of those key points to each other as a series, not as one long curve, but as a series of straight lines and angle breaks and angle relationships or point-to-point relationships. And then once you have that established, it's relatively easy to just bring in the curvature of that form. Now again, unfortunately, because of the distortion of my lens, you're not going to quite see, your view of the objects is not exactly like my view. So that's just a limitation of the technology we have. But I still think you can see the way the contour is made up of a series of angle grades. So to help me place things, I'm going to use, I'm just going to use the line of that lighter stripe on the object. I will eventually, or I will then go in and ignore that when I start blocking in our color. So I'm going to look at the angle, the overall angle of the top of the object, how it's slightly dropping down to the right. So I want to make sure I see that. I'm going to place the stem, or what's left of the stem, like the stump of the stem. And that's while if we look straight down on that, we may see it as a kind of circular form. Because of the foreshortening, it's really a kind of narrow shape like that. And okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the proportions. So remember, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the height, holding my holding my brush at arm's length with my elbow locked. I'm going to take the height and I'm going to see how that height compares to the width. How many times does that height go into the width? So it goes in once. And I'm going to move the brush over. It goes in once and less than so it goes in, I'm going to take the height, it goes into that once, and then a little bit less than twice. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to measure height. Now my view of this exactly is going to be different from the camera view. So height to width. So I need to make those be the same. So is that technique clear to everybody, how I'm doing that comparative measurement?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now that I have my objects in, I'll put my the line of the surface of the table. And I will now draw in my cast shadows as we've been doing. And again, as I've always been doing in this class, I'm ignoring this just to not throw in too much complication and prolong the demonstration. So I'm drawing my cast shadows. So people probably see this. It's a piece of rolled up duct tape. I'm just going to ignore that. That's just there to keep the apricot in place. I tried my museum wax, which I usually use, but it just doesn't work on an apricot. So my cast shadow on the apricot. So I'm also going to indicate the light and shadow pattern on the apricot. So let's really look at the light and shadow pattern. Really study how that moves on, how that cuts across the apricot. I think it does something like that. And that squash has a little bit more of an ambiguous shadow pattern. So it's not as clear as some of the objects we've been using. And you'll find that sometimes with darker objects. It's harder to see exactly where the light and shadow breaks, but it's still there. So we always want to find that. So we can see that the light and shadow, I believe this here is a cast shadow. Is that may be, yeah, that's the object rolling under. So our light and shadow pattern starts here, comes up, across, up here, and then cuts across here, and then comes up here. So we really have to look at that. So let me show. I think it'll be helpful if we eliminate the reflection from the white surface of the painting. So if I'm going to take a piece of black board, I'm going to get rid of that reflection. So just to think about reflected light, you see how that happens. I get rid of that white surface, and that light is no longer reflecting back. So I think it becomes easier to see the shadow pattern here, right? Where the shadow breaks, the way it breaks down there. So it gets a little bit confused when we have that reflection. And I don't know if people have noticed this, but as I work on the painting, the reflection disappears because I cover up all that light. And so I'm going to find that shadow pattern. It's up here on the form. Comes up about like this. right? Okay, so I think I have a decent drawing to start with. Any questions so far about anything? So what colors would we use to start the background? Like, given our limited range of colors, how are we going to approximate that background?
Just white and black?
Yeah, very simple question, right? So we're just going to use Payne's gray and white. And we're going to mix up about that value. And we're going to block in our value. Now, I think actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this. I might have mentioned this in my drawing class. This is sort of by accident. What I'm doing is sort of by accident a technique that's referred to as sight size, or it's similar to a technique called sight size, where an artist will make a drawing or a painting by setting up the surface they are working on right next to the object they're painting. And the only reason I do this is because it makes it possible for me to show you what I'm working on at the same time that you can look at the actual objects. Some artists do this so that they can easily match colors, values, and shapes in the drawing. So you notice when I put this color down, because it's right next to it, it's very easy for me to see that that was a little bit too dark. So I'm going to that out. Now, I don't want to imply that making paintings is always about matching value or color, because certainly it's not. But I think it's not a bad skill to have. I think that developing the ability to look at colors and match them opens up all kinds of possibilities for the colors you're able to use as an artist. So I think it's a good thing to develop the ability to do. So with our colors, we're almost, that Payne's gray and white gets us almost exactly that color. Now, again, remember, matching the colors isn't the issue, but starting to suggest the relationships of warm and cool is the issue. So again, maybe this is a very simple question or so obvious it doesn't need to be asked. But what will we do to make the relatively warmer color of the tabletop?
Add the red oxide,
I'm sorry?
add the red transparent oxide.
Yeah, so we're just going to make a darker color. And it's going to be warm. And we're going to warm it up. By adding a little bit of transparent red oxide. Now remember, we're not matching, we're just trying to get degrees of warm and cool. The relationship of warm to cool. So I'm going to put a little bit of that down, and I'm just going to ask myself, does that start to approximate the value relationship? I think it does. I think that's about right. Right, the value relationship of the tabletop to the wall. I think that's about right. So I'm going to go with that. What do you think? Anyone think that should change?
Looks pretty spot on.
It's about right. And again, we're able to get, just because the colors of the background and the tabletop are so neutral to begin with, we're able to get pretty close to those colors with these this paint we have. So something you can do with a palette knife, by the way, is like, say I have that whole mixture here. I can then scrape this up and make consolidate that. So watch as I block in the canvas, this reflection is going to slowly disappear. It could maybe be a little bit cooler, right? I don't know. Could maybe. I'm not going to labor over that. Again, I don't want to prolong this. I'm going to cool it down just a little. I think I've mentioned these. This is a fan brush. I find this useful to just clean up as I'm going along. You certainly don't have to use something like that. I sometimes like doing that. So now that pepper is, how are we going to get to suggest the value of this pepper? I mean, the temperature of that pepper compared to everything else. So the pepper is a little bit warmer than the background, right? It's cool, but it's a little bit warmer than the background. I think I'm going to start that by making just a slightly warmer black. So I'm going to take my blue black and put just a little bit of transparent red oxide into it, just to warm it up a hair. And then I don't think I want to paint, in fact, I know I don't want to paint those shadows with pure black. So I'm going to put just a touch of white into it. And as always, I'm going to compare, I'm going to determine if that value is accurate based on values I already have in the painting. So I'm going to put down this, and that to me looks too black, too dark already. But I'm going to compare the value. It's too dark. So I'm going to whiten that a little bit. I'm going to ask your indulgence one more minute, if you don't mind. I need to take another 1 minute break. So if people would indulge me, I would appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording.
Sketch of it with the colors.
Hi, everybody. Again, thank you for indulging me. I know there were some questions about due dates and the assignments. What are the questions?
Go ahead, Michelle.
The question is, you want the excuse me, the composition. You want us to sketch it out first?
Well, I don't, to be honest with you,
And then you want us to color it in later?
It's really
I'm
up
sorry,
to
you're breaking
how
up.
to do it. If you feel like you can do it by just blocking in big shapes of light and dark, that's fine. If you want to draw it out first, you can do that too. It's really up to you.
But are we drawing it out, letting you take a look at it and then finishing once you say this is good or whatever?
No, try to do it, try to do it, try to do the first phase of the assignment as the blocked in, simplified compositional study.
Okay.
So, again, if we look at, yeah, I'll go over it again. It seems like there's some uncertainty or insecurity about this assignment. Do people, would people like a little bit more time before maybe what I should do, let me think about this for a second. Okay, here's what I want to do. I'm getting the feeling that this is maybe because of the way things have to be due in one of these online classes. Maybe this is too much all at once. So let's hold off on the borrowing a composition assignment, and I will work in a more clear description of how to go about that assignment at a later date. So, and I'll figure out the syllabus and the schedule and figure out exactly when to do that. I'm having a feeling that maybe it's not clear enough at this point. So let's do that, okay? So we're gonna hold off on the borrowing a composition for now. Okay?
Thank you.
And this will be, the only thing that will be due on Monday is this painting and
right here,
structure painting that I'm assuming people have at least started.
Yes. Okay. And the organic fruit, right? I mean vegetable that we did the day before yesterday.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The planar structure one. Yes.
Oh, the planar structure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so how are we doing? Am I recording? Yes. Okay, so going back to this value. So when I'm looking at this value on my palette, I'm surprised that it's coming out so dark. Maybe that's better. I'm going to try this. I may have to like this. So I'm just going to block in very broadly. Shadow mass. Now, when I look at the shadow mass on the object and the cast shadow, in general, those are the same value. Now, there are differences, there are small differences within them, but do you all see how in general, on average, the values of the cast shadow and the values of the form shadow on the squash are all in the same dark range? Do you see that?
Yes. Yes.
So what I would do here is the first thing I would do is just
oh my God.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's like contradicting with how you told us to do everything.
It sure is.
I'm sorry?
They just threw me off with that. I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll show you why I'm going to do that. It's just
Okay.
a more efficient way of handling this. I'll show you.
Wow.
So if I just block this whole thing in, with one mask, that changed to be change the temperature a little bit of that of the medallion. So it actually, it's just a more efficient way to make the paint. And it helps to create a sense of unity in the painting. When I treat this all as one big area. So now I have the big unified area for the shadow. Again, thinking about it as one big massive shadow.
I have an observation. Yeah, and a question at the same time, I guess, I don't know. If I was doing the background shadow, the shadow, I mean, the cast shadow on the background and the surface, and without you showing me this, I would have used a darker value of the gray of the background to cast that shadow, and a darker value of the table, I mean the surface, to cast the shadow on the surface.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're doing is you're seeing the variations within the larger shadow mass. But
Okay.
I'm starting with a simplification of all those variations, just because it makes for a more efficient way of making the painting. So I actually wouldn't have done this right now, but just to show you what I mean. So now that I have that big shadow area down, I can pretty easily now go in and add those darks that you're talking about. So I'm going to add the shadow accents. That's going to start helping to define the object. So I'm adding that wet in wet. And I'm going to add shadow accents that shows the darker part of the cast shadow behind the object. It's a way of handling that shadow area. Again, because that shadow area, in spite of variations within it, that shadow area, it has a very unified, it's all kind of unified area of value. Then I'll go into that and add the shadow accents and the darker part of the cast shadow behind. I think it's much easier than doing all those little separate areas and then trying to knit them together. Now, I think that I've made that shadow too warm. Now that's okay. I'm not going to fret about that. I can always change that. I'm going to leave it for now because the value is what's the most important thing here, the shadow. So do you see what I'm doing there? I'm starting with the overall unity, but then just bringing in adding those shadow accents and any other variations that are in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. So you just did you just use black to do that?
I did. In this case, I just
Okay.
put straight black into the paint that was already there because I know that that paint that's already on the canvas is going to lighten the black.
Okay, great. Thank you. I need to understand that. Thank you so much.
I'm going to set up my, I'm going to go in and redraw the line. Okay, so now I'm going to be careful of not over making the light side of that object too warm. So what I'm doing right now, mixing on my palette to get the value for this object, I'm looking at how much darker this is than this, and I'm going to mix up this puddle of paint for the flesh of the squash, comparing it to that, which is the value for my background. So that needs to be darker. And I am gonna, again, be a little bit more cautious on warming this up. I do want to make this just a hair warmer than the color I have for the background. So being a bit cautious, not putting too much in, not putting too much red in. I'm going to try that. And let's see how this works in terms of value. I would say a hair darker. I don't know what other people think. But again, just comparing those values. Now, of course, here it's lighter, but again, that's something I'm put in. Actually, I was going to say that I was going to put in this highlight after, but I take that back. I'm actually going to put that highlight in first, and I'll tell you why. Because I think
Yeah, because that's got to be really light, right?
Because it's got to be really light, and it would be very difficult to add white paint to the wet dark to make it light. So I'm going to make that light. And so that's actually approximately the same as the background.
As the back, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put that in. I'm going to look at the way it's wrapping around the object. And it's wrapping around the object sort of like in the same way like a belt wraps around someone's hips. Right, it's sort of coming around like this. So I'm going to pay attention to that. So I think I want to start with something like that. Now I again warmed the color up a little bit. Like if you look at this compared to this, to me that I think that's a better approximation of the relative warm and cool that we're looking at. What do you all think?
It feels better against the
It
background.
does. Yes, against the background. Yeah.
Sometimes you make these paintings, you're surprised at how closely you can approximate green, even though you really don't have colors that should get you anywhere near green. So my shadow, I think, is definitely going to need to get cooler and a little bit darker. So I'm going to very quickly bring in a warmer color into the shadow. I think it needs to be just a little bit darker in the shadow. But I keep mixing up my warms and cools. I'm going to bring a cooler color in the shadow. And in part of, and by doing that, I'm going to, at the same time, sort of use this as an opportunity to start indicating core of the shadow. So letting that cooler color merge with, I'm going to let it merge with the warmer underneath it. And let that start to act as a kind of core of the shadow. And I don't mind leaving some of the warmth there, even though I think it's a little too warm. Let's bring in some of the halftone. Start to turn that. It's a soft halftone in this object. Okay, now before going any more on that, one exception, one thing I'm going to add is I'm going to a little bit of a lighter, slightly cooler bit of light coming in here. Now I'm going to give it a little bit, without going really into detail, I'm going to just see if I can start to indicate a bit of that the kind of characteristic sort of hills and valleys of this fruit. So I'm looking at the halftone, little line of halftone here, very subtly letting you see those, those swellings that make up this object. And I don't need to, I can state that fairly simply at this stage. So I'm sort of making that part of, I'm thinking about those swellings, at least in this initial stage of doing it, as really part of the shadow and halftones. And remember those, the swelling, the moving up and down of this object that gives it that kind of characteristic form. You want that to read not as, just like lines on the surface, but you want that to read as genuine movements up and down of the body. So you want to be thinking of this as part of the light and shadow that builds the form.
Professor.
Yes.
So basically, the more that you kind of touch on the areas, the liven up it becomes. Is that it?
To lighten it, I'm putting in lighter paint. I'm painting lighter paint in wet on wet.
I see. Okay.
Professor, you're purposely bouncing to kind of create that variegated texture, right?
I'm sorry?
You're purposely like tapping to sort of simulate that sort of variegated, spotted, mottled surface.
No, I'm not doing that yet. I'm just building the form. I'm not paying attention to the modeling or the little spots. To be honest with you, I would do that. Like I would first build the form of this object, then I would let it dry, and then I would go back on and put the spots on.
But I understand that, but I'm saying that you're tapping the paint to sort of create that, as opposed to stroking the paint like up and down or side to side.
Yeah, I'm doing that, right, I'm doing that, but again, that's in order to like tap in little little variations in the light and shadow and halftone in order to just build those little planes. So I'm really right now just thinking about building planes. Does that make sense?
Yes, completely.
Smaller planes to the larger ones. So let's take a break from this. And let's now go into the warmth of go to the warmth of the apricot. I said let's take a break from this, but I'm going to do one other thing. So my highlight ends a little bit abruptly here. So I'm going to let that just. What do you think is good? So what do you think? What do you think for the apricot?
More of red and white?
Has to be much lighter, right?
Yeah, much lighter and right. I think we're just going to use red and white.
Kind of bright at the same time.
That is a very warm, very fiery color.
Like you see that stroke you have in the apricot already on your picture?
Yeah.
Kind of like that, right?
We need, let's see. Yeah, something like that. You're talking
Right.
this month.
Okay. Right.
So we may not be able to get exactly, or we may not get, because we're going to have to make this value light and as warm as possible, it may not be possible to approximate really the intensity of that warmth. So we're just because we don't have quite the right colors. So we're going to have to do the best we can. So, because I want it to be as bright as it appears. So it's going to need a lot of white in it. So it's going to inevitably, with these colors, it's going to appear a little bit dull. At least than what you're seeing up there. Now, I could make it warmer by adding more red. But if I add more red, I'm also going to make it darker. And I don't want to do that. I want to have the same value relationship to be things around it. So I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of the intensity of that warmth so that it is as light as it needs to be. Or nearly so. And that shadow is going to be a very warm dark. So not pure red, but mostly red. A little bit of black, a little bit of white. Bring in some darker for the halftones. So, is it just me, or now that we have that very warm, that very cool blue, these very warm colors for the apricot, you could almost believe that that's starting to approach a green.
Yes, I thought it was me. Like, how did you do that?
It's just that, strange effect of color relationships that Amelia pointed out. So the colors, we perceive color really a lot based on what we're seeing around it. And of course, there's really nothing in that that's green, because we would need at least some yellow to make a green, right, to add to the Payne's gray. But it's still, by virtue of its relationship to other colors, we start to perceive that. Now I've seen part of the halftone on the apricot, I see as being ever so slightly cooler. So just here along that halftone edge, I see a slight cooling of the halftone. So I'm going to very carefully add some halftone that's a little bit cooler. And when painting flesh, whether it's the flesh of an object or the flesh of a human being, there's virtually always a variety of warms and cools. So you always want to look for that when painting natural objects. It tends to give the object that, it's part of what imparts a sense of the believability of that object you're painting as a naturalistic object. The drawing is off on this thing a little bit. And so I need to keep that overlap. So what I'm going to need to do is make my apricot a little bit taller. See, so I don't know if people remember, so now our very bright reflection that used to be over here because of the white of the canvas is gone. Now we're actually getting a reflection of the apricot, the painting of the apricot here. So this reflection has now become a slightly orange reflection. Okay, so let's put in our cast shadow for the apricot. And in a way, I mean, in one sense, our painting will be finished, just in the sense that we got the whole thing blocked in. Of course, I would work on it much more. So putting that cooler half tone at the back of the cast shadow. Also knocked in some cast shadow. I mean, some halftone cast shadow here. So I would now start to work up the apricot a bit more. Start refining the rendering on this. Okay, so we have a block in now of the major elements of the painting. We could certainly continue refining this painting. You know, some of the big areas of the painting, like now that I'm looking at my block in with all of my colors, I think I might want to make the tabletop a little bit less, maybe just a little bit darker, maybe. And I would try to get it, right now it's appearing a bit yellowish. I would try to get a little bit more of that kind of red-brown look to it. I would continue to refine other things. So, you know, like if people look here, that cast shadow has a distinctly blue halftone, where I haven't quite gotten that. I would want to do that by bringing in a halftone that has some Payne's gray in it. There's certainly more information I could paint into the apricots, more information I could paint into the squash. I might do one thing on that squash, so I don't leave that stem. Let me finish the top of the squash. So what I'm going to do to paint that stem is you'll notice that it's a kind of complicated mix of lights and shadows, because what it is, that stem is made up of a series of small forms, and each of those small forms is responding to the light and shadow. So actually what I'm going to do to indicate that is I'm going to lay down the shape of that stem with a dot. Approximate the shape of that stem. And I'm going to go into that with some white. I'm going to pull out those little planes of light that I can see. So those darks are a little bit too dark, so I'm going to lighten them. Pulling some of the white paint into those darks. So thinking about these little bits of light as little planes that are facing the light source. Something like that. And I would continue to work on that. One other obvious element of the form, now that I have that in, is the lighter area here. And that's helping create a sense of those swellings. So anyway, and again, from here, I would continue to develop some of this, refine and develop. But we have the basic elements down, the basic elements certainly that we've studied so far. We have the basic light and shadow blocked in. We've looked at value relationships. And now we're starting to indicate with a very limited palette variations of warm and cool. So is all of that, clear enough to everybody? Can I answer any questions about any of that, what we've done? Any questions about what, how to go about setting this up for Monday?
So I have a question. So
Okay.
we have the pepper one, and then is the more fruits, including with the one with the cold color and one with the warm color.
Yeah. So the painting you're going to hand in for this assignment, which is a warm, cool still life. If you want to use just one object, that's fine. You don't have to use two objects. But you want to set up an object in relationship to the surface of the table it's on and the background, where you have some variation of warm or cool. You can do what I did and have like a cool object and a warm object, or if you would prefer, you could just have a single warm object, but try to set it up so that you have different temperatures around it. So you're still painting different temperatures. Does that make sense?
Yes, because the warm and cool assignment is not on the Blackboard yet, so I'm not sure what are we going to do.
Yeah, I'll put it on Blackboard today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Would it be a bad idea to do it inside of the box?
No, no, you should do it inside of the box because you want the same kind of lighting situation.
Yes, okay. And then, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, again, unless somebody has a room where they can work, where they can really control the light without the box. So if you can only have light coming from one direction on an object that's sitting in front of you, then you don't have to use the box. But if you're in a room like that most people's rooms, just given the way
No.
our world is. You want to have a box, and so most light is blocked, and then have that single light shining on it.
Right, okay. And then, so that's for the warm and cool still light, and we're doing a still and then of the portrait like the first assignment, correct?
Well,
A setup,
yeah, so you want to, by next Monday, you should have completed the planar structure still life.
right,
So the still life where the demonstration I did, that was
for the pepper, right?
pepper. And then you should
Right.
also have this warm, cool still life completed. And yes, you should submit it with an image of your painting and an image of your setup.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So the borrowing,
Professor,
sorry. The
okay, I have a
borrowing
question.
position is not due on Monday.
Yeah, let's hold off on that, borrowing a competition. It just seems like it was throwing too much stuff at you in too short a time frame. So we'll hold off on borrowing a composition, and I will get back to everybody about how we're going to incorporate that into the rest of the semester.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Professor, hi. So the oil that you use to kind of, ease the tense of the paint was refined least oil by Gabelin.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? There's not a good connection.
What oil did you use to spread the paint around? Was that the refined least oil?
I used the medium that I talked about on Tuesday. But you can also just use mineral spirits if that's all you have.
Okay, I have the refined least oil.
You have you have refined linseed oil.
Yeah.
Do you have liquid?
I don't, but I could get it.
Well, I mean, you can use linseed oil as a medium, but if you add that to your paint, it's going to make the paint, it's going to take forever for the painting to dry. But if you make a mixture with liquid, like I explained on Tuesday, and as you'll find on that oil painting medium sheet that's on Blackboard, that would work better.
Okay, so, all right, so the medium oil, just forget that, don't use that. Or what I meant to say is don't use the linseed oil because it takes so long to dry. Use the medium oil instead because it's quicker in terms of drying.
No, you want to make to make a medium that's not going to take forever to dry. You want to look at the recipe that's on the oil. On Blackboard, I have a document that's titled Oil Painting Medium. And that will give you a recipe of mixing liquid, linseed oil, and mineral spirits to create oil painting medium.
Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and look at that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so if there aren't any questions, I will see you all on Monday.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Professor. Have a good weekend, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.